Hi, welcome to our webcast of December 11, 2015. Hello and welcome to our webcast. So my name is Christian Debré and I'm happy to introduce you Amy Asburg, Director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hello.
Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a project of the Council Canadian with Disabilities. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights, opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminate against people with disabilities. Today's topics. A judge grant leave to appeal the delay of Quebec's euthanasia program. The second one is the Federal Justice Minister asked for 6-month delay to adopt legislation pursuant the Carter decision. The third one, 2015 years in review, and we have one announcement to do. So I give the voice to Amy Asburg.
Thanks, Christian. Okay, so our first item is a judge grants leave to appeal the delay of Quebec's euthanasia program. In a decision rendered on December 9th, an appeals judge allowed the appeal of a December 1st Superior Court decision that declared inoperative articles of the medical aid in dying law that relate to euthanasia until a federal law is written. And
okay, the first decision was good.
Right.
It was a good thinking. We talk about it just a little bit later.
Right, and they actually have to allow, well, they don't have to allow the appeal, but usually they will allow an appeal, especially with a big issue like this. They often want the appeal court to look at it, and so it'll be a 3-judge appeals court. In the decision, the judge said that suspending the sections in question would prevent some citizens from having euthanasia. He said that the case raises several questions of constitutional law, notably those related to the division of powers and fundamental rights and freedoms. So when the judge allowed the appeal, he also stopped, the lower court had stopped the program, so he stopped the stopping. In other words, he got the program going again.
But for one thing that we have to mind of, we should separate the constitutional debate and the debate from the subject itself. It's two different things. You could have an opposite thinking about one against the other, and we should not put it together.
Right, so the constitutional issue is whether the federal government's law prevails over the province's law. And the other question is whether assisted suicide, or whether the euthanasia law, whether it's healthcare, as Quebec says, or whether it's really euthanasia. And that's what the people who are bringing the case say. The appeal will be heard by 3 judges of the Court of Appeal on December 18th. So that's when it's going to be heard, but it won't be decided then. So the euthanasia can still go forward from now until when they decide, and depending on how they decide, it might still go forward. But remember that the federal law is still in effect that says you can't assist somebody's suicide. It's in effect until February 6th. At least. This means that the euthanasia provisions of the law respecting end-of-life care came into effect on December 10th and will remain in effect until the Court of Appeals rules on them. So that means people can still have euthanasia up to February 6th of 2016. Though some Quebec doctors remain concerned that performing euthanasia may put them in legal jeopardy, Health Minister Gaëtan Barrette has assured them that they will not be prosecuted by Quebec. However, Minister Barrette does not speak for the federal government.
Yeah, people who do euthanasia,
are still violating the criminal law.
They still violate the criminal law, and if somebody sue them as an independent suer, not the government one, they could ask to a federal court.
Right, they could bring it to a federal court saying that there's a violation of the federal law. And the question is, would the federal court want to act on that before February 6th? And that's hard to know. That's kind of a political
I'm not a
question.
constitutionalist, and even them could not answer to this question.
Right, and in a sense, that's more of a political strategic question than a constitutional question, especially given the short time. But, you know, we would have to see how that works out. Somebody would have to object to a euthanasia, and so we'd have to see how that goes. The opinion of the Superior Court that medical aid in dying is nothing more than euthanasia will be looked at in the appeal as well.
Yeah, and it is euthanasia. Remember that we, both of us, was present and we were witnessing the debate of MPs. And in this debate, Miss Véronique Yvon said that it is euthanasia, and she did it at least twice, and that I'm sure of it. But even that, I think that at least one other MP said this is euthanasia. Okay, this I'm not sure, but the first one, Miss Véronique Yvon said it twice, answering your question.
Right, right. So they do admit as much that it's euthanasia, but they're calling it medical aid in dying because they want it to be thought of as healthcare.
Yeah,
and
it is though.
I wanted to thank the Aubert Martin at Living with Dignity for help in preparing this update, because I got a lot of material from him. Okay, the second item is the federal justice minister asks for a 6-month delay to adopt legislation pursuant to the Carter decision. The federal minister of justice and attorney general of Canada, Jody Wilson-Raybould, announced on December 3rd that her office has asked the Supreme Court of Canada for a 6-month extension to draft and adopt legislation pursuant to the February 6th, 2015 Carter decision.
At least it is a little bit more responsible from them, because taking 6 months to look at a so important subject, it is a kind of minimum. And before that, because it was feel by all parties in the election that is a kind of hot potato that people have to juggle with it. Nobody want to do a debate on the election. It should be a nice way to do that, because election, you vote for somebody who do something important. But no party was willing to go to the this debate.
Their opinion. And probably part of the reason was in 2010, there was another bill before Parliament to allow for assisted suicide, and it was defeated. And it was defeated because it's bad public policy. And once people looked at it, they realized that it was a bad idea. And so they didn't want to be forced to take a public position. So the problem was that they only had a year to evaluate it. The Conservatives didn't take any action on it.
And there was election, and now it's a new government, and nothing happened yet.
Well, yeah, and they have a commission that's looking at it, but there won't be time before the 6th of February to.
And this commission has change of mandate.
Right, exactly. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this extension would give the Trudeau government until August 6th of 2016 to pass legislation to regulate assisted suicide. The government proposes to establish an all-party special committee to make recommendations on a federal government response. The committee will draw from the work of the federal expert panel, the College of Physicians, and Quebec study process, and other sources to draft legislation. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but basically the federal expert panel was established in July, and then they had to suspend their operations in early August. So they only had about 2.5 weeks to operate before they had to suspend their operations because the election was called. So, and then once the election was held on the 19th of October, they only had less than 2 months to finish their consultation process and to write up their results, which are supposed to come out on the 15th of December. But their mandate was changed so that instead of writing up recommendations for legislation, now they're just supposed to write up the opinion of the public on the issue.
Yeah.
And so that kind of makes a little strange why they actually exist, but
it's very weak.
Right, exactly. And it's a little discouraging because these are experts on this issue. One person is a palliative care doctor, one person is someone with a disability who has a lot of experience on disability policy issues, and the other is a constitutional lawyer, and they really should have a lot to say about this.
And this is a serious committee with a view over real technical subject, not the politics, not what everybody think about it, even if it's democratic. In that system, we need to know the truth, okay?
Right.
We need to dig in the subject for making good decisions. Anybody who just look around over that would say, oh, I prefer to die fast and not having any trouble. But afterward, there is so many different situations and so much importance about the weakness of people when they are sick. We have to take care, very much care,
Right.
A lot of care.
Right, and there was another committee that was a provincial committee that was made up mostly of people who support assisted suicide. So obviously their report is going to talk about what a great idea it is.
Yeah, made a committee about do you want to have a high speed, increase speed on highway and make a committee with everybody who agree with it.
Right.
The result will be we will increase the speed limit over the highway.
Right.
But if you want to take a good decision about it, you must have expert about driving. You have to have a safety. You have to look about truck drivers and so on and so on.
Right.
Because there are so many things to look around to make sure to take the right decision.
Right. Right. Okay, so there's no word from the Supreme Court as to whether they will grant the extension, but chances are pretty good that they will, because I think they realize that if they don't grant the extension, there's going to come a point in February where there will be no law, and that could make things a free-for-all, and that would be really bad.
And the free-for-all in this situation is very, very irresponsible.
Freedom to kill people without many limits, and that would be very bad.
Yeah.
Okay, our next topic is the 2015 year in review. And I have to say, this was a difficult year to be an opponent of assisted suicide and euthanasia.
Yes, a bad year.
Yes, with more defeats than victories and the need to change our orientation, it was a very tough year. On February 6th, to start it all off, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the sections of Canada's criminal code that prohibit assisted suicide. The court stated that physician-assisted death should be available to people with, quote, irremediable medical conditions, unquote, including disabilities, that cause enduring physical and psychological suffering that is intolerable to the person in his circumstances.
So it's mean that technically, don't go too fast. Technically, a young man between 20 and 30 years old who is diabetic, who loses his first girlfriend and think that this losing is make him suffering too much, and because he have a very dangerous medical condition, he might be eligible for this euthanasia law.
Right, right. And actually, it's not clear whether this decision allows euthanasia or assisted suicide. It looks like it could allow euthanasia. So that's another reason that we want the federal government to regulate
Yeah,
on
at
this
least
topic.
making a law. A bad law is better than no law at all.
Right, exactly. Well, sometimes yes,
Sometimes,
no.
yes, sometimes I agree. Sorry.
But if we could at least limit it to assisted suicide, because at least the person has to take the final act, that is a little more, it's a tiny bit safer than euthanasia.
Just think about people, a healthy people, okay, productive one, who suddenly lose his two legs and have a lot of pain in the hand of his legs, and it's continuous. In the beginning, it will be a very hard loss because you lost the ability to move yourself easily. You lose friend. You may lose your wife or your husband if you are a woman.
And in fact, if you're a woman, you're more likely to lose your spouse than
Yes.
if you're a man.
Yes.
Men lose fewer spouses than women do.
Yes. And what happened that you have to mourn what
You've lost.
you
Yeah.
lost, and it takes time. And if you doesn't have a law, or if the law is too permissive, you may want to kill yourself within 6 months, a year, or even 2 years. But if you stay in this condition, life goes on. You will change your mind. You will participate to hockey on a sleigh. You may play basketball over a wheelchair. There's so much thing that you could still doing.
Right.
But you have to realize it and stop to be depressive.
Right.
And it takes time.
And one thing about the Carter decision is it doesn't limit it to people who are at the end of life. So that's a dangerous effect that needs to be regulated in a law. So this is a very broad decision, creating an opening in the law. Oh, actually, I forgot to say that the court gave Parliament 1 year until February 6, 2016 to come up with a law to regulate physician-assisted death, whether assisted suicide or euthanasia. But this is a very broad decision, creating the opening for a law with the widest scope in the world. The court does not limit eligibility to persons with just a few months to live, and it allows euthanasia or assisted suicide for people who are capable of committing suicide unaided, or those who are suffering with purely psychological reasons.
And we have to remember, in the Carter case appeal, the reason why they appeal, that the people want to be killed by a physician because they fear to not be able to do it by themselves. And now the court say, don't worry, we will kill you, and we will kill you even if you're still doing
even if you're still able to kill yourself. Yeah. So in their logic, they said you need to have assisted suicide because you might not be able to do it yourself, but they didn't limit it to people who can't kill themselves. It's kind of funny.
So this doesn't answer to the question of the Carter appeal. They go furthermore. They go sorry, my English is so poor. They go too fast, and it doesn't answer to the right question.
Right. And this year, the federal government remained silent on the question until July 17th, when it appointed an expert panel to develop recommendations for Parliament to regulate the new program. However, with the election call on August 4th, the official work of the panel was suspended. And a new government following the October 19th election, the panel's mandate was changed to merely collect input from stakeholders on the issue. Thus, the panel's report, due on December 15th, will probably have very little impact on any proposed legislation drafted next year. And like I said, that's pretty sad, because this is a good panel and they think they would have had some good things to say.
Yeah.
And they certainly did a careful job of talking to people. They talked to each group for an hour, so a lot more thoroughly than the other panel did.
I agree.
For advocates, this was a year of shifting our orientation and approach. We needed to allow for participation in the process of crafting safeguards, considering that what protections would be most effective and likely to be accepted, and deciding on negotiation strategies and tactics. And that was pretty hard because we were used to just saying no assisted suicide, period, end of sentence. But now, in order to prevent the worst possible outcomes, we need to participate in negotiating what safeguards are in the laws. And to do so, we need to figure out which safeguards are best and which ones are most likely to be accepted and negotiate with the other side.
And if we take all the safeguard possible to make sure that nobody will be killed without any reason, it became impossible to have assisted suicide or euthanasia, which is not what the law wants.
Right.
So we have to
we have no choice.
We have to choose within any.
We know the law is going to pass, and we don't like it, and we don't even accept it. But the problem is that if we want to have a role in preventing people from dying, we have to participate in developing the safeguards.
Yes.
So that's what
even if we don't like it.
Right. So, okay, the next item on our year-end review was last February, we reported on the death of Gabriel Bouchard, a Montreal resident who refused medical treatment while he starved himself to death. In an interview, Monsieur Bouchard stated that if he had had a sufficient revenue to live on, an adaptive apartment, and aides who received a living wage, he probably would not have wanted to die.
Which is very important.
We spent a lot of time talking with him, especially Christian spent time talking with him.
It is in French, but there is an English translation in our
on the video
that we offer on our site. But this guy never received any pressure. He gave us this interview and he talked freely, whatever happened. And he's very clear and simple. It's a proof that what we said about
that it's unnecessary to have assisted suicide laws, because he was able to do that himself. But
inside the law of today, not the next law.
Right, exactly. But one thing that makes me sad is that he saw 2 psychiatrists and 3 doctors, and they all said, "Sure, go ahead. We think
he's lucid."
Right, he's lucid. He's not depressed, except for he said in the interview that he had been depressed at other times, and
they never tested.
They never tested him for depression or did any screening like that. So I don't know.
I wish that somebody will do a law that exclude people who are depressed, because everybody could be depressed sometime for a long time.
Right, exactly. And that's one thing that we are pushing for when we push for safeguards, because we want safeguards that are going to have an effect before the person dies, not afterwards.
Afterward, it's not very useful. The people is dead.
Yep. So the silence of the federal government that we talked about a minute ago during the spring was echoed in Quebec, where regulations to implement the law concerning end-of-life care didn't begin to appear until mid-July, less than 6 months before the law would come into effect. And that's more than a year after the law was passed. They didn't come up with any regulations. The regulations that were issued covered only a thin slice of the activities covered by the law. The practice guide issued by the College of Physicians in September left many of the same questions unanswered, such as, what does end of life mean?
Yeah, if we have a life expectancy of 100 years old, end of life could start at the middle, at 50 years old.
Well, it's more that what they were talking about as end of life could vary from 2 months to 8 years.
Oh, 8 years could be very long.
Right, that's an awful long time to say somebody's at the end of life and they would be eligible for assisted suicide if they have a prognosis of 8 years. So it's very subjective, obviously, but it's also
It's
really
not 2 or 3
broad.
weeks that you shorten the life of people
Right.
for making sure they doesn't suffer. 8 years is quite long.
Right, and also the longer the prognosis, the more possibility of error. So if you think somebody's going to die in 8 years, probably they could have 20 years left.
Yeah.
It's a possibility.
And there's a lot of
Misdiagnosis
Diagnosis.
and misprognosis. Yep. Also, what formal protections exist before the person is euthanized? Those are some of the problems that we noticed were missing in both the regulations that were issued by Quebec and also the doctor's practice guide. And finally, how can the program be tracked if euthanasia deaths are reported as other causes and records are only kept for 5 years?
This is something fishy about it. A normal file about people are kept for
Normal medical records.
no limit of time, and
Right.
this one will be destroyed.
Right.
So we will not have any choice to do an epidemic study about it.
Yeah.
And this is sad. And in this way, when people try to hide what's happening really,
Right.
it's because something dangerous is happening.
Right. They're not
Most of the
calling. They're not calling the death from euthanasia. They're calling it something else, whatever the person was sick with, whatever their person's physical problem
Dementia,
was. Right.
or
Right. Or not dementia yet, but soon. But
Yeah.
whatever their other disability was. And why wouldn't they want to call it euthanasia if they're so proud of this
yeah.
of this law, but they don't want to call it euthanasia. So they're lying on the death certificate about that. And then they're only keeping the record for 5 years. So it makes it impossible to study the issue. Also in this year, getting back to the end of the year, a decision in Quebec Superior Court on December 5th of this year challenged the use of the term medical aid in dying, while declaring that the euthanasia program of Quebec's law, provisions of Quebec's law should be inoperative until the federal government adopts a new law governing these practices. And we talked about that at the beginning of our program. However, an appeals court judge, in granting an appeal of this decision, fully reinstated Quebec's statute that went into effect on schedule on December 10th. So that was yesterday. It's now in effect. And like we said, it's possible that people might have euthanasia before the federal deadline of February 6th. We don't know what would happen in that case, whether those people could be prosecuted under the federal law. Or whether, not the people, but the doctors who do the euthanasia. So we had news from elsewhere this year. Advocates in the United Kingdom. Yeah, I was going to say United Nations. That doesn't work. The United Kingdom celebrated a great victory on September 11th when the House of Commons resoundingly rejected an assisted suicide bill. Yay!
They do a better job than
we did.
On this issue.
Not Dead Yet UK actively opposed versions of the bill in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Not Dead Yet members contacted MPs with letters, emails, videos, and phone calls, challenging not just the assisted suicide bill, but also the negative messages in the media about people with disabilities as scroungers. That's the term that they use over in the UK.
So the personal activity of opponent changed the mind of most of the press and the MPs.
Right, exactly. So as the media and the public came around, so did the members of parliament, and the bill was defeated as just too dangerous.
Okay, but at least somebody made sure that the press heard them. That's what's not happening here.
Right.
The press just doesn't see that the opposition exists.
Right, and one thing they did very successfully over there is individuals with disabilities made short videos, 3-minute videos, about why they themselves opposed assisted, not why their organization opposed, but why they personally opposed assisted suicide. And we've been trying to get people to do that for years now, but people are reluctant to do it. It's very easy. All you have to do is turn on your video camera and talk into the screen for a couple of minutes about why you oppose assisted suicide. And that was very effective in their campaign to get the MPs to vote against assisted suicide. And this victory followed a solid defeat of an assisted suicide bill in the Scottish Parliament. And that defeat came about because a report by a committee in the Scottish Parliament found that it was really dangerous and it was a bad public policy, so it was defeated.
So they studied it thoroughly.
Yeah, they studied it thoroughly and they realized that it's a bad idea and they defeated it. Unlike in the United States, where a legislative maneuver revived an assisted suicide bill in California, skipping over the committee phase and bringing it directly to the floor of the Assembly for a vote in early September.
It's a kind of fast track.
Right, exactly. It had been in committee, it died in committee, but then somebody revived it on the fast track and suddenly it was on the floor being voted on.
Without being studied.
Right, exactly. Despite intense efforts, both chambers of the Assembly passed the bill and Governor Jerry Brown signed it into law in early September. In this way, 38 million people are now subject to a largely unexamined assisted suicide bill. That's more than people in Canada.
Yeah.
There are 38 million people in California.
There are 34 million
right.
in Canada.
I think between 34 and 36. So yeah. That's a lot of people. So we have one announcement, which is that we are going to take a winter break and return with our webcast on January 15th of
But we are still working.
2016.
We take a break about the video.
We're just taking a break for the webcast, but we're still working. And you can follow our progress on Facebook, on our Facebook page for updates during the break, especially so for information about the federal panel's report that's coming out on the 15th, what happens with the appeal in the Quebec case. You can find out about all that on our Facebook page. So we wanted to wish you a Happy New Year. Thanks for joining.
Merry Christmas.
And all the other holidays.
And every other holiday, as we say. Okay.
So thanks for joining us. Have a good New Year.
Bye.
Bye.